Well, hello, everyone. What a joy it is to be together. My name is Beth Leach, and I'm a pastor at a church in Naperville, Illinois. I also serve as a Missio Alliance board member, and I'm so thrilled to be your host today. And I'm especially excited to talk with Dr. Curt Thompson on a topic that I know will be so helpful to anyone who is serving in any sort of leadership role, whether you're in the church or out of the church. This is a topic of understanding our brains and what they are doing when negative thoughts and feelings come into our minds. And so one of the things that help us do is create patterns to overcoming some of these mental obstacles that I know that we all face. I know that I do. Leadership is not for the faint of heart, and leadership brings obstacles. And sometimes those obstacles are in our own mind. And so he's going to help us create patterns to overcoming some of those mental obstacles that keep us from flourishing as joyful and as healthy leaders. For those of you who don't know Dr. Curt Thompson, he is a board-certified psychiatrist and the founder of Being Known, which is an organization that develops resources for hope and healing at the intersection of neuroscience and Christian spiritual formation. He is also the author of Flourishing, The Soul of Desire, and Anatomy of the Soul. Two of these books by InterVarsity Press have now turned into Seminary Now courses. And so let's take a look at the trailer for Dr. Thompson's Soul of Shame course.
Shame is everywhere in our culture. Evil doesn't just use shame to make us feel bad about ourselves. Evil uses shame to prevent the world of goodness and beauty that God has intended from coming into being. I'm Curt Thompson. I'm a psychiatrist who works with people to heal shame. I founded the organization Being Known to develop resources for hope and healing at the intersection of neuroscience and Christian spiritual formation. In this course, we will look deep into the soul of shame, revealing its ubiquitous nature and neurobiological roots. I will teach you some theological and practical tools to dismantle shame based on my years of researching its damaging effects and counseling people to overcome those wounds. This is a course that will teach you about a lot of those things with the intention of giving you the freedom to live the new life with the renewed minds that God intends from the beginning. When we do that kind of work, we better understand what shame is up to, but also enter into God's healing and what He is up to in the regeneration and renewal of everything that He has made. I hope these sessions will inspire you to imagine the ways that the healing of your shame can lead to new creations of beauty and goodness in the world.
And a special thanks to our sponsors. That truly would not be possible to have this conversation without our sponsors, Missio Alliance, InterVarsity Press, and Seminary Now for bringing us this topic. I'm really thankful for their commitment to providing church leaders thought and engaging resources in abundance, truly. If you haven't connected with any one of our partners today, they just bring so many resources that bring so much blessings to us to help with other church leaders. If you're new, by the way, to Seminary Now is a streaming platform that delivers video courses in Bible and theology and ministry from a diverse group of leading professors and practitioners. I happen to had the privilege of teaching a course on empowering women in ministry that is in their library as well. And you can check out their courses on seminarynow.com. And I can tell you as a pastor, this is a resource that I have used for many people in our congregation and for small groups. And so we hope that you will check it out. And now let's get on to our conversation. Once again, I just want to introduce our guest in a little bit more detail for you. Dr. Curt Thompson is board certified by the American Board of Psychology and Neurology, and his main focus of clinical research interest has been the integration of psychiatry, its associated disciplines, and Christian spiritual formation. He is actively engaged in learning and teaching as he supervises clinical employees and facilitates ongoing education groups for patients and colleagues. He also speaks frequently on the topic topic at workshops, conferences, and retreats. And he serves as an elder at his local church, which is Washington Community Fellowship in Washington, D.C. And his duties have included preaching, teaching, and participation in the fellowship's healing prayer ministry. Welcome, Dr. Thompson. We are so thrilled to have you today.
For me, it's an honor, and I'm humbled to have the opportunity, and really look forward to having the conversation with you.
Yeah, me too. We had the opportunity to pray right before this call, and we said we can't know what everyone is going through, but we know that leadership has its challenges. And just to all of our participants, we want you to know that we prayed for you, and we prayed that the Spirit of God would break through any barriers that you're experiencing as a leader, and that your heart and mind would be illuminated. And I'm trusting and believing that the Spirit of God is here and working through you, Curt. Friends, we know that there's going to be questions that are going to come up for you, and we want to hear those questions. So please post your questions in the chat box at any time during the event, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. We also want to know where you're coming from. So just drop in the chat box where you are, where you're coming from. Maybe tell us a little bit about the weather, since I know the weather's a little bit wonky going on in the country right now. And so with that, Dr. Thompson, let's go ahead and lean in together. Can we just first start, for those maybe who've never been part of this conversation before, or maybe aren't familiar with your work, can you give us just a brief overview of why it's helpful for us to have a very basic understanding of what's happening in our brains when we're overwhelmed, sad, or scared, or anxious, or maybe any other emotion that maybe makes us feel like we aren't functioning as we should? What's happening in our brains?
Well, I think a couple things that are helpful for us to pay attention to. One is we aren't the first people to be anxious. The biblical writers, the writer of the Hebrew Bible, knew that people were anxious. We've been anxious for as long as we've been on the planet. So being anxious, being depressed, being terrified, being overwhelmed, those aren't new human features. But one of the reasons why I think that the role of neuroscience has been helpful in recent years is that we do occupy a particular place in history in which we are at the end of about 500 years worth of modernity, which has trained us to be people who tend to think about life in a certain way. And so when it comes to dealing with so many of the things that we want to deal with, we tend to think that we can just think ourselves out of this. This is Descartes, and I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I should be able to think my way into not being anxious, into being able to lead well, into not being depressed. We'll just think our way out of this. The challenge of this, of course, is that part of how it is that we are so anxious and that we are so perhaps cut off from one another has to do with an overblown sense of how we operate as only rational thinking beings without paying attention to, since so much of what the authors of the Hebrew Bible were paying attention to. One of the things that neuroscience is doing is that it's introducing once again to what the mind actually does. And so knowing some of those mechanics, I tell patients the knowing of mechanics is useful in the following way. If you injure your shoulder and you go to the physical therapist, they can give you exercises to do that. And you go home, if the therapist has told you, to get the mannequin out, they get out this diagram and they show you how your exercise is going to be useful. You are far more likely, as you understand the nature of the exercise, you're far more likely to do it. When we have our understanding of the working mechanics of the brain, and not just the brain, but when we talk about the brain and the mind, which includes not just what my brain is doing, but relationally what we are doing between each other and how that is affecting the brain, when I have a better working understanding of that, I am much more capable of taking action that can change my experience of that. And so when we ask, well, what is that experience? When we are in distress, when I am anxious, that then leads to my depression, that leads then to other behaviors to cope with these things. I'm drinking too much, I'm working too much, I'm looking porn, and all the things that I would do. We would wonder, well, what's going on in the brain? There is a word that we use in this field that I again called interpersonal neurobiology. There is a word that we use called integration. And this word represents what I describe as what happens with an orchestra. You have different sections of the orchestra, all of which need to work well individually, but they also need to be able to listen to and come together the other sections. The mind is not unlike this. What we read in the 86th Psalm, the 11th verse, therefore, Lord, create in an undivided heart that I may fear your name. This notion of being undivided, this notion of having a mind which what sense and image and feel and think and do with my body, all of those things represent the totality of what it means for me to love the Lord my God with all of my heart and mind and soul and strength. But those different features of how my mind works depends a great deal also on the degree to which I'm connected relationally to other people. As my mind is developing, for my mind to flourish and be healthy, no matter whether I'm living in 24 AD or 2024 AD, for that mind to flourish, I need to know that my capacity to sense and image and feel and think and behave themselves are well developed, and that they also have capacities for connecting to other parts of my mind. But the only way that that happens is if I myself am also being deeply connected to other people by whom I'm being deeply known. When St. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, the person who loves God is known by God. He does say the person who loves God knows God, all of which is true. But Paul's language there and in Ephesians chapter 3, where he repeats it, this sense of my being known by someone else, such that I come to know things about myself that I can't know until I'm being known by you, unless I'm giving you access to parts of me that I don't know. Those parts of me are revealed. It enables me to pull more parts of my orchestra onto the stage. And they bring these things together so that we can live out this life that 86th Psalm talks about. Our challenge as leaders, of course, is that we believe that our job often is to make benchmarks. I have goals that I have to set. I'm going to cast the vision, and then somehow I'm the engine that's going to pull this train. And I find myself doing it by myself. And one of the first things that we sense, for those of us who are leaders who are on this call, one of the first things that we sense that gives us a signal that my mind is not integrated, that it's difficult to love the Lord my God with all of who I am, is because I am alone in my job. I am alone with these things, and my sense of isolation gives evil and my old unfinished business the opportunity to put me in a place of disintegration, where what I'm sensing and feeling and image get separated from one another, as I am also disconnected from the people who care about me and that I care about. And my longing for our time today is that people will become curious and aware and be asking the question, by whom am I deeply known, so that I can become more integrated, so that my leadership can flourish in the way that God has called me to.
So important. I think it's been so normalized throughout the years that leadership is lonely at the top. And while, that is true to a degree, but I think that we have normalized that to the extent that we think I am a leader, therefore I should be lonely, therefore no one should really know me. And I know that your work and so many others have highlighted how detrimental that is to those who remain in hiding. And one of the things that happens when we remain in hiding, I know for me, is my thoughts then stop being grounded in reality. I forget what is true, right? I think about years ago, I was pastoring a church in a very difficult situation, and I found myself in a therapist's office, and I plopped on the couch and I said, I'm here because I'm wrecking the church that I'm pastoring. I'm wrecking it. I'm not a good pastor. I'm not a good leader. And I think that's one of the things that happens to pastors and leaders of any kind when we're in hiding is negative thoughts really take over our brains. So could we just talk about that for a moment? Just some of the science of what happens to our brains when we start to have those negative or overwhelming thoughts?
Well, one of the first things that I'll emphasize, which we've already hinted at a bit, and one of the beautiful things that I love about my work is this opportunity for us to see immediately what it means for a Christian anthropology to be the crucible within, to be the container within which we are now looking at the mechanics of how the mind operates. One of the first things that we see on the second page of the Bible is it's not good for the man to be alone. As it turns out, neurophysiologically, the primary, ultimate, fundamental force behind which creates our anxiety is our sense that we are alone in the world, that we are that people are leaving us behind, that I am alone. My anxiety then is the primary signal to tell me that something is wrong, so that when I have a thought, the thought might be, gosh, I don't think that was a very good sermon. I'm not sure what to do with this elder, this elder on my board of elders who is driving me crazy. I'm not quite sure what to do with my own marriage that I'm worried is falling apart, or my son who I think is an addict. All the things that start to come into our mind that we all hear, like we know that this is happening. One of the first things that happens that only ramps up our anxiety is my sense that when I feel something that is distressing, this word that we would use, the word negative, any of these kinds of things that's distressing, the first question is whether or not I'm actually aware that I'm alone in this distress. To the degree that I feel alone, not just with the thought about my son or my marriage or the elder, but the feeling that I have, this distress. And the question would then be, who is the person that I'm going to pick up the phone and call, such that I'm not walking with this by myself? Because one of the first things that we see is that if I tell you, Tara Beth, I'm really anxious about X, Y, and Z. I'm worried about this. I feel overwhelmed by that. To the degree that I have the experience of your saying to me, gosh, that sounds really hard. Immediately, the first thing that happens in my body, long before it gets to my brain, in thought time, the first thing I sense is a reduction in my distress, not because you fixed my problem, not because you give me a solution to what to do with the elder. That might come later, but primarily because I now sense that I am no longer by myself with myself. Harkening back to the second page of the Bible. This is the beginning of all healing. One of the things that we often are not aware of is the significant implication of the theology of the Trinity. This notion that Jesus does not do anything by himself, even the crucifixion, this notion that even here, I am working to be aware that I am not by myself. He asks the Father to forgive people. He doesn't even say that. He's asking for help. He is a man who is together with others, such that this very, very difficult work of life can go forward. And so the distress that we experience, the first question that I'm going to ask is, who are the people that you are regularly in contact with? And you're not just contacting them when the 5-alarm fire calls. You are in community with them on a regular basis, such that when the anxiety comes, I am not going to be left alone with what leaves me alone most often.
Yeah, thank you for that. And one of the reasons that especially like Christian leaders, I think, remain in hiding or are alone is because there's such a stigma connected to depression and anxiety still today in the church. And I think some of us even carry that maybe from, a couple decades ago when this was especially true, that if you were depressed or if you were anxious, well, you just didn't have enough faith, or you weren't relying on Jesus enough. And I'm so thankful that this conversation is becoming more normalized, and that more and more we're seeing the stigma erased. But could we talk about mental health with leaders for just a moment? Because I think one of the greatest risks in leadership is the toll that it could take on our mental health, that it's not if we won't have maybe some sort of break, but maybe when. Whether it's just a moment of anxiety. And so could you talk to us just about some of the common things that you see in leadership?
Right. Well, I think as I hinted at just a moment ago, I think one of the first, we don't just begin with the question of, when someone walks in the office, we don't begin with what are your symptoms? I'm anxious, I'm depressed, I'm drinking too much, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Those are not unimportant things, but they are not the first thing that I want to find out about. The first thing that I want to find out about is what is the story that you believe is true about the world that you're living in? What do you think is true about what it means for you to be a leader, for you to be a pastor, for you to be a CEO, for you to be a mother, a father? Remember, every single person in the world is going to have the opportunity to lead something at some point in time. You will have the opportunity to be that person who, in taking initiative, are creating space for others around you with whom you have intimate contact to flourish. That's what a leader does. You create the space for others around you that you are responsible for to flourish. But I can't give what I don't have. I can't enable others to flourish if I myself am not flourishing. And by flourishing, I often think that that means that I have to meet all my goals, that I have to never flinch, that I have to never show weakness. I always have to have my stuff together. I always have to be perfect. I have all the answers for all the questions. It's as if somehow we've forgotten that when we were made naked. We were vulnerable, that we are vulnerable creatures. We don't have to like work to be vulnerable. Like we're the only creatures that put clothes on themselves. It's just the way it is. Some people put clothes on dogs. That's odd, but we are the only people that put clothes on ourselves because we are naked. And so the sooner we get around to naming, I am a vulnerable creature. And as the leader, if you are coming into my office, believe that you live in a world in which you need to have all the answers. Part of my task is to help you consider that that's not actually the world that you occupy. That's not the real world. The real world is one in which you are naked before God and before others. We are vulnerable creatures. And so this gets back to the question of not just what are you worried about, but by whom are you being loved? By whom are you being deeply known? Such that the gifts that you have, the vision casting that you have, the initiative that you have, the gift for preaching that you have, gift for setting limits for your employees that you have, all the giftings that you have are enabled to flourish because you yourself are in a position in which you're not afraid to fail. You know you're going to make mistakes, and you know that you have a net of people whose job it is to be present for you when those painful things happen. They're going to happen. This is what primary parenting is about. Children are not, like we tell, look, the only way that you won't screw up your kids is just don't have them. It's the only way that you won't screw them up, because kids don't need, it's true. Kids don't need parents who are perfect. Kids need parents who are attuned, who can set limits, and who are willing to repair rupture. That's what children need, because but parents, I can't give to my kids what I don't have. And so I'm also going to need the care of others who help me do this. Moses, we have this example when Jethro comes and finds him and says, dude, you're doing too much. Need help. They'll come along with the idea of the Trinity later on, but for now, like, y'all need help to help you because you cannot do, because you are a vulnerable creature. For many leaders whom I visit with, this is novel information, truly novel information. And what they are also not aware of is that they are not aware of the degree to which their own personal developmental stories, the first 2 decades of their life, is coming into the room with them all the time. As we like to say, you take your family to work, you take your family to church, you take your family to the bedroom, to the boardroom, wherever it is that you're going to go, you take that with you in your mind. And if I am not being loved, being seen, soothed, safe, secure by those around me, I will become anxious, because in my vulnerability, when I make mistakes, my anxiety will have me sensing that I'm alone with it. But if I know that even when I make mistakes, I can have a conversation with Tara, who's my board chair, who can say, this is what, let's talk about this. And I can learn to be unafraid of being afraid and being able to have conversations straightforwardly. It enables me to take the risks that I need to take. This is what's important. I, as a leader, can better help to equip the people that I'm leading when I know that I have space where I can go, where all my mistakes can be dumped out of the junk drawer onto the floor where we can clean them up. This is crucially, I mean, this is important to know. There's no system in the world that does not have a way to evacuate its waste. Think of it. Every living creature takes, I mean, not to sound crass, but I mean, we get it, right? Every system does. Every parent needs to have a way to talk to your spouse about your children so that you don't kill them. This is what we're in we have to have a way to discharge things. I have to have a space where I can say, I don't know what I'm doing. I have to have a space where I say, I'm worried that I'm not going to get this job done. Where someone can invite me to say, tell me more about that, so that your anxiety does not perpetuate, so that you do not become depressed, so that you're not drinking too many bourbons at night, all the things that we end up doing. In post-COVID time, where COVID did not just cause things, it pulled the curtain back and revealed things that had been bubbling around for us for years. We learned how devastatingly disintegrating isolation can be. But we had been practicing that for many, many years before this. And now the question, now that it's been revealed, the question that I'll have for leaders is, who are the people whose job it is to take care of you? One of the first questions that I will ask pastors is that, whose job is it to take care of you? And of course, they often look at me like I have two heads. Like the question really does not compute. I don't know anybody who has a hard job in the world than pastors. There may be people who have jobs that are as difficult as this, no question. Nobody has a harder job because theirs is the job where everyone expects them to assume that they will be where the buck stops. And this is just not how the brain can function well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have a really, really good question, Curt, from David. David wants to know, so when we're in teams and how can leadership help people on their team, and assuming this leadership is not professional therapists, how can leadership help people on their team be safe people so that when others come forward to be known, how can we equip our teams to be safe people?
Well, I think there are probably a set of tactics that we can roll out if we had a couple of days to do that. I think the first question is when leaders want to equip their team members to be places that create comfort and confidence for others. That leader, it's important. The first step is going to be where is the space where that is being created for you, the leader. Because you're not going to, like me giving you a set of tactics, I can tell you, this is not like algebra class where we just set it like a left hemispheric logical linear way. Here, go do these things and this will be fine. This is the kind of thing in which if I don't have the felt sense of what it means myself to have space created where I can also be safe, where I can be comfortable and confident in my mistakes, it won't matter what somebody tells me how to do. Because if I can't feel it in my chest, it will be difficult for me to imagine how it's making any difference for anybody else. But there are four words that we use. We want to see, will team leaders, will your team members be able to create space for people to be seen in the context of their work? Does that person that I'm working with, if I'm on a team and you want me to create safety for others that are downstream to me, are those people being seen in the job they're doing? Like, do they have experience with it? Would they say, yeah, Curt is a guy who gets me in the work that we have to do? I don't have any question about that. Second thing would be, am I safe? And by safe, I don't mean I am actually able to be comfortable and confident in the work that I do. I'm going to have space where I can be soothed. Meaning, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to be upset. Your job is not to say whatever your mistake was is fine. What we want to be able to say, though, is even when things are not fine, you need to know that we're fine. I don't want you to be worried about me. We're going to talk about the hard. And that way, I then create opportunity for this fourth, as we've seen, soothed, I want to be safe, to be secure. I want you to be willing to take the risk to make mistakes in the work that you're doing. But you're not going to be able to do that if you don't first feel seen, soothed, and safe. This is not the same thing as letting people do whatever they want to do. The last thing I will say is that when it comes to enabling others, you will discover that there will be things that emerge that may have to do with your team members' own story that has got nothing to do with this place of employment. And the place of employment is not where they're not there to do their therapy. But you might say to someone, it sounds like there are some things about that. It could be, I wonder if there's some things about the first couple of decades of your life, about your own story, that are really kind of show up here at the office. I would love for you to be talking to somebody who's going to help you unpack that, so that that isn't intruding into the work that you're trying to do here. The workspace is not the space where you're doing that work explicitly, but it may be the space where for the very first time, leaders can help their team members discover that this is something that is being brought to my attention, perhaps for the very first time.
Powerful, powerful. Yeah, just to be able to create those safe kind of spaces for our team that could propel people to getting the help, to not stay in hiding. So thanks for that, Curt. I want to return back to the emotional and mental health of leaders in particular. You mentioned that COVID pulled back the curtains, and one of the things we're observing is, things that were already there, but maybe more of a spiraling, reaching for that extra bourbon, or addicted to porn, as you said. And oftentimes those are not the first warning signs. Those are red flags. There's so many yellow flags leading up to that point. And, if only we could learn how to be, more aware. And so could you just help us understand a little bit, what are some of those yellow flags that we could pay attention to learn how to recognize when, maybe things are not okay. Maybe I need to slow down. Maybe I need to do some digging down here.
Well, the first yellow flag, it's like, the time you're aware that you're going to have a cold, the virus has been on board in your throat and heading toward your lungs for days. It doesn't show up 30 seconds before you have symptoms. And so we then would say, well, gosh, we want to do what we can to prevent that from happening in the first place. And so the first thing I would ask would be this. Could you, as a leader, if I were to ask you, could you give me the names of the 3 people in your life whom, if I were to ask them, they could tell me everything there is to know about you? Because if you can't, I would say that's the first yellow flag. And you're listening to this and you're thinking, gosh, I feel very anxious. I don't feel very this. I don't feel very that. But I don't have those 3 people. And I would say, right, just like the virus is embedding itself long before you know that it's there, this is already happening for you. It may not be a bright yellow light because you don't have that first, just the tingle of a scratchy throat yet. But if you can't answer that question, that means that you're already vulnerable for the next level of things to begin to happen. And then what would those things be? When we start to see signs like either I notice that I'm anxious, I feel it, I sense it in my ruminative thinking, I sense it in my body. Can I identify where did my anxiety show up? In my chest, in my jaw, my hands, physiologically. I know that I'm even running 4 times a week and still having trouble sleeping. I find that I'm even, not that I'm doing things that I shouldn't be doing, like I'm not drinking more bourbon. In fact, I'm doubling down on making sure that I'm eating exactly what I'm supposed to eat. That I'm being discriminative about absolutely everything because I'm trying to regulate my world because internally something doesn't feel quite regulatable. Something's going on internally. Another question that would say it helps prevent these, and we say, well, like, what are the yellow lights? What are the yellow flags? The presumption, of course, is that as we are listening to this, individuals are listening in. And I find the individual that's listening, I'm assuming that what's the yellow flag that I, Curt, need to pay attention to? Those are important. But what I would want you to be considering is, what is the yellow flag that we need to be thinking about for me, that we need to be thinking about for you? And so this is why, again, Trinitarian theology is such a big deal, why it's let us make mankind in our image, this notion that we are relational beings. Then the question that I think that we find to be really helpful is, on a regular basis, we're in leadership, we're all familiar with, annual 360s and a whole range of ways in which we assess leadership and followership and so forth and so on. But a simple question to be asking your team, asking the people who are around you, is, what has it been like for the last month to live with me as your boss?
Wow. That's a great question.
What has it been like? What has it been like for? But we can do this. We can do this in our marriages, right? We can say, what has it been like to be like with me as your husband for the last month, for the last quarter? Tell me what this is. You're like, excuse me. Do we want the answers to those questions? Here's the thing: if we ask those questions on a regularly practiced basis, the very powerful message that we're sending to others is that they matter to us, that we want them to know that we matter to each other. And that's why we're doing this. Because my primary mission here is not to reach benchmarks. My primary mission is to become more like the King. Primary mission is to help us develop outposts of Eden in the wilderness. My primary mission is to practice for the heaven that's coming. My primary mission is not, at the end of the day, to raise $17 million this year. That might be part of what it then comes. But what happens? What am I going to do with my anxiety when only 12 million is coming? What am I going to do with that? And who is going to be with me in that? Look, I'm not the guy that's going to tell you how to better run your economics for your nonprofit, because that is not my field of expertise. The thing is that you've got plenty of intelligence to know what you need to do your job. The question is, am I feeling anxiety free enough to do my work when I know that I will make mistakes? And then what will I do when I do? What will I do when shame wants to come calling? Who is going to be in my soul who can remind me that what we're doing primarily is being formed into the image of the King? And part of how we're doing that is we are helping people have clean water in Africa. We are helping people. I'm pastoring this church in Missouri. I'm doing all these different things. I'm trying to run a small Christian school in California. I'm trying to do all these different things that we're doing. How can my mind flourish in such a way that I, as a leader, enable the minds of those around me to flourish such that they can live into their giftings? I'm not worrying about whether or not we're making benchmarks. Evil wants us to worry about making benchmarks. What I want to be paying attention to is, who am I becoming? Who are we becoming in the process of this? This takes a lot of work, because we live in a world that is bent on reminding you day in and day out and day in and day out that making benchmarks, having what you want, doing it the right way, doing it the best way for its own sake, which is not unlike taking from the tree of the knowledge of the fruit of good, the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In this sense that I have to be able to take these things rather than to receive, and to do that work functionally and well. But I'm going to do that together such that these yellow flags that we've just been talking about become things that I see far sooner when they start to show up, because I'm not the only one who's looking for them in my life.
Yeah, it sounds like one of the things you're describing here is even a retraining of our brains, a repatterning of our brains. When we're going down these unhealthy places. And part of that is to surround ourselves with people that can speak into our lives. And that's courageous and incredibly vulnerable, but so important when we're going down these roads. And so do you think it's possible to retrain our brains this way?
Well, I mean, I love, again, some of what I love about the work I get to do, is this, as we read about in Ecclesiastes, nothing is new under the sun. And so it's not like the language of neuroscience is telling us that something new has emerged in the world, as much as it's giving us different language to talk about what has always been true. And so when St. Paul writes in Romans chapter 12, I'm beseeching you by the mercies of God First, submit your entire body. Everything. Your body. The body is a body of believers. The body is my own body, which, like, frankly, I don't like doing. I like to be in charge of my body. I like to do what I want. I want to eat what I want. I don't want God to be in charge of my body.
Right.
But when you submit this, then he's saying, like, don't be squeezed into the world's mold, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that means to be transforming, like, I'm going to have to let that happen to me. I'm going to have to submit myself to something else that is going to transform me. And one of the beautiful things that we're learning with neuroscience is that there's nothing that I do that I experience as transformation that does not involve my physicality. And so my new neural networks are being created when I work to practice the Beatitudes, when I work to focus on and attune to the fruit of the Spirit. So, for instance, if I'm going to pay attention to the fruit of joy, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, all the rest. If I were to take a week and focus my attention on how can I be an agent of peacemaking this week? That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be an agent of peacemaking this week. I'm going to be an agent of long suffering this week. That's what I'm going to be. I'm turning my attention, focusing my attention on a particular way of being. And as I do that, I'm literally activating neural networks that are brand new, and then I'm strengthening them over and over and over and over again. And what we are doing, our mind is literally being transformed in its very physicality. And so when St. Paul, though he wasn't a neuroscientist, he might not have known much about how there were neurons or anything like that. But I don't think any of this would surprise him. I think I would imagine him to say, well, of course, this is what I'm talking about. Because this is what the Holy Spirit is doing. He's not just creating a new ethic, a new abstract idea about how to be nice to people. He's talking about how we in our very bodies, both in my own brain and between us, our remembered experiences between us are being transformed. And the physics of how we relate to each other and within our own minds is, of course, being transformed in the same way. The beautiful thing about this is that we know, we often wonder and worry, am I really becoming the person Jesus wants me to be? What we're learning, from neuroimaging and other things, we can see that, like, yes, we have transformed brains that are telling us these changes are durable, but not because I by myself am doing them, but because we, the body of Jesus, in the power and presence of the Holy Spirit, are making durable changes in Curt, in Tara Beth, in John, in Ralph, in Lauren. All of these are happening in the context of this body. Because nothing that I do by myself is not going to affect the person who's next to me in some way, shape, or form, and vice versa. And the work of attuning to this and the neuroplastic changes that we know that neuroscience is teaching us to make is all part of the beautiful work of God that the scriptures have been telling us about now for nearly 4,000 years.
Curt, I am just, as you were talking, I just kept praying, Lord, I pray for those who are despairing that they're always going to be stuck in this place of maybe they're just crippled with anxiety or depression. I'm praying right now that they are filled with hope and that their minds are loosed as it is in heaven, that their hearts are loosed as it is in heaven. So I took that as a word of hope and encouragement that healing is possible and that we can be transformed by the renewing of our mind. And so amen to that. And
amen.
That word of hope. Curt, can we talk for a moment about discipleship? We have a lot of leaders on this webinar who are wondering, okay, so I want to pastor or shepherd people into, helping them understand some of these practices. And so we have a question from Joel. He said, how can these mental health practices, practicing vulnerability, how can they be integrated with discipleship?
So let me just say, thanks, Joel, for the question. Let me just say that practicing these things is discipleship.
There you go.
It's not like we have discipleship over here in this silo, like we have the scriptures, and now somehow we're going to shoehorn in new material world issues into this. We would say, for instance, that if we were to do a mindfulness practice, if we were to say, look, Every time, for example, every time we have an elder board meeting, every time we have a staff meeting, once a week, we're going to have a staff meeting. And the first thing we're going to do is that we're going to take 5 minutes and we're going to do a silent prayer and meditation, which we're going to center. There are a number of different exercises that one can do in which you center on the presence of Jesus being in the room. What do you hear him saying? Are you able to hear Jesus say, are you able to hear the Father say, you're my daughter, you're my son, whom I love, and in whom I'm well pleased? What is it like? What would it be like if after over 6 weeks, every time we have a staff meeting, we know that the first thing we're going to do, we're going to come in and we're going to center. And we are going to explicitly pay attention to the fact that the Holy Spirit is in the room and is delighted with us. Now, you do that one time, that's one thing. You do that every single week for 6 weeks, and I can tell you that already you'll be imagining and evoking changes in people's brains. And we're not, and in so doing, because it now becomes a matter of like, it's not just something that I'm doing in the meeting itself. It becomes a practice that I start to look forward to doing. The day before, morning of, it's already having an influence on other parts of my day, because I am conducting a practice that essentially is the first 5 verses of Psalm 62. For God alone, my soul waits in silence. And I wait for God alone in silence in order for me to rid the distractions of everything else that evil wants to use to remind me that I'm not God's son, I'm not God's daughter, I'm not loved. He's a tyrant.
Yeah.
And instead, this becomes a spiritual practice that forms me just by going to a staff meeting.
Wow.
That's one simple example of ways in which we can creatively develop a whole quiverful of practices. Another one being the practice of gratitude. What if you once a month decide we're going to take our staff meeting, whether we're in a church or we're in a law practice or whatever we're doing, and we're going to go around the room and we need to look at each person. And we're going to say, Tara Beth, today I want to tell you this is what I'm really grateful for about you. And we're going to give you, I'm going to tell you something measurable, something sustainable, something that is positive, that's really happened between you and me in the last month, something that I witnessed. And I'm going to say, I'm really grateful for this. And we're not just going to have you sit and say thank you and then move to Bill next to me or Sarah who's going to, we're going to have you sit with that for the next 60 seconds. And we're all going to watch you take it in. And you're going to be as uncomfortable as all get out because we don't know how to receive gratitude. But if you do this, give you 6 weeks, and I will tell you, you do this enough time, people will not, they can't wait to get to those moments where it's my turn for people to say what they're grateful for. People are not practicing expressing gratitude. People are practicing receiving gratitude, which we best be about, because by the time we get to heaven, by the time heaven gets here, and Jesus says, I am so grateful you're here. I am so glad you're here. Will we be able to take it? These and others are things that we can begin to do to create cultures, outposts of Eden, even in our staff meetings, even in our board meetings, even in our faculty meetings, where people will even see the places of work as the place that I want to come to.
Yeah.
Because it is there where I am practicing learning what it means for me to be receptive to love. You know, we like to say that, you know, we look around and we humans, we're not very good at loving one another. The evidence, you know, is pretty patently obvious. But as we say, because we can't give what we don't have, we're even less capable of being receptive. Is our biggest hurdle, allowing myself to be loved, because, you know, love shows up because I think I want it until it does and asks me for things. It asks me for those parts of me that I hate the most. And it asks me to reveal the parts of me that I'm most vulnerable about. Terrified when you see these things, you're going to go. And so these kinds of practices become the act of discipleship because we are primarily giving people the opportunity to practice allowing themselves to be loved, even in what it feels like an administrative board meeting.
Yeah. One of the things that we pray in our staff at the church that I pastor is, Lord, may your kingdom come in us as it is in heaven. And I'm so excited to integrate this practice of gratitude in our staff gatherings. What a beautiful picture of the kingdom that we are praying would be made visible in us as it is in heaven. Curt, I think there is so much more that we could unpack, all the more reason to point everyone to our Seminary Now courses, especially Curt's Seminary Now course. And then, of course, your work and your books, which have been a tremendous blessing to me. I quote you all the time in sermons and messages and to people. And so I'm praying that the Spirit of God just loose some things in people today, and that people are filled with hopefulness as they enter into 2024. What a great conversation for us to have as we enter into 2024, as people are thinking about their rule of life or practices that they want to integrate. And so, Curt, thank you so much for this very rich conversation. And of course, be remiss not to thank our sponsors, which would not even, this conversation wouldn't be possible if it weren't for them and their generosity. Missio Alliance, InterVarsity Press, and Seminary Now. Thank you for this webinar. Thank you, Dr. Curt Thompson, for sharing your wisdom to us. And then, of course, for all of you that participated and asked your questions, so sorry that we weren't able to get to your questions. And so thanks again, Curt. What a blessing.
Sure, Beth. It's great. Thank you. Following Jesus is hard to do. And, we tell people the brain can do a lot of hard things for a long time, as long as it doesn't have to do it by itself.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful to be in the room with you today, with another pilgrim who knows what it means to run hard after the King. And so it's been an encouragement for me. It's been very humbling. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Blessings. Wonderful. And invite everyone once again to check out Dr. Thompson's courses at seminarynow.com. And we are praying for you, leaders, that you be able to become healthy leaders for yourselves, your families, your churches, and your communities. And so may God bless you richly and abundantly with the fruit and the joys of the kingdom. Thank you so much for joining us.